Writing research papers is the backbone of an academic career. If you've got something to say, you need to tell the world about it. Otherwise, your academic career will absolutely plummet. I'm Dr. Andy Stapleton, and I'm here to help you make sure academia works for you. I've talked at universities around the world, at Sydney University, in Leipzig University, and also at Harvard Business School. And I've shared all the tips and tricks. And in this video, I'm going to share with you how you can really boost your academic career by writing in a very simple and structured way. I've seen academics use this structure time and time again to boost their academic career. It's not just about publishing, it's about publishing the right way efficiently, just to make sure that your career doesn't go down the pan. But if you get it right, you could save yourself hours and hours of stress and really boost that academic career by making sure that your research gets to the right people in a timely manner. So this is how you do it. I have written countless papers during my academic career, and here is one of them. You can see that it looks dense, it looks structured, it looks kind of wordy, but you'll be very pleased to know that it's very easy to start with a bare bone structure and build up to something like this. Now, the first thing you need to do when you're writing a paper is get data. Now, as your research progresses, you should be creating little stories as you go along. This is what I mean. Now, this is an old research project that I was on at Flinders University, and every 2 weeks I would do a formal presentation to my research committee and my supervisors. So here I would sit down and I would go through everything I collected the 2 weeks prior. But I didn't just say, here's a load of raw data. I made sure the data told a story, and I produced figures that made it look good. So this is what I mean, is that, look, here's a data dump, but really I was like, this is what it really means. Here's all nice figures, and these figures, importantly, with not much effort, can be put straight into a peer-reviewed paper. So this is what you need to be doing throughout your PhD in research, is creating publication-worthy-ish figures and schematics and all that sort of stuff. Like this one, for example, this was just to explain the process that I did to my supervisors and the people in the room, and this ended up going into an actual paper, which I absolutely love because it was already done. I'd already done the work for it. So you need to produce the data, and not just the data, you need to produce the figures that explains that data. I hope that makes sense. Here's another one. Here is a figure that I produced. Here's some scanning electron microscope images, but I didn't just put the images in as they came out of the machine. I made sure they were publication worthy by putting in an bar and the scale, and that's important because then I can take these figures and I can put them directly into a paper that I think I may write, and it's just super easy. Like, here's the raw image, and you can see it's not very good. So this is what I did to all of my images, is made sure that they were publication worthy. Here's something that is not so publication worthy, and this is just like the raw data that comes out of the equipment, but you can see here that it wasn't publication worthy data, so I didn't waste my time putting in the nice error bars. Clearly this is just noise. It was meant to be electrical conductivity measurements, so I didn't bother upscaling that to a figure worthy of publication. So there we are. This is what I mean, is once you've got all of these figures, then you can start looking at putting it into a structure, and this is what I mean. So as we scan through this paper, just forget all the text, but just take a note of where I've positioned these figures. Here's one, here's a schematic, and then we move on, lots and lots of text. Here's the next thing, figure 2, the sheet resistance. Here's the next one, which is the scanning electron microscope images. So you can see that I've sort of like built up just the story just using the figures. Now overall there are about 8 figures in this paper, but importantly I didn't put the text in first, I put the figures in an order. So what I recommend you do when you've got your data is you put the figures in order and you talk to someone about the flow of that story. If it doesn't make sense and you can't say it out loud to someone and explain why the figures are in that certain order, then it's not a good story structure. So until you've got that basic flow in the story structure of your data, don't touch the words at all. You need to be able to explain it, talk it out loud to someone, and as soon as you can make a succinct story, boom, you're good to go on to the next steps, which is the actual sort of writing of the paper. A basic paper is made up of this sort of structure, where we have an abstract at the beginning, then we've got an introduction, and then that introduction often contains a little bit of a literature review. Then we had the methodology, the how you did it, the sorts of things you did to get your results. Then we've got the results and the discussion, so those can be intertwined, and then we have a conclusion, acknowledgements, and references. So this is a typical structure of a large majority of research papers, but we don't write it sequentially. We don't go from the abstract all the way through. In fact, once we've got the story structure, the first place we need to jump jump into is the results and discussion. Let's talk about that. So the results and discussion part is the bit that you do first. This is number one of our process. We go in and we make sure that we can tell a story, and then we start fleshing out the story based on those figures. So in figure 1, our schematic, what are we talking about? What things do we want people to take away from that schematic? Start broad and get narrow. So when they first look at it, what do they notice? And then if you look into the details, what also does it tell you? We need a pyramid structure that actually sort of like leads people to the finer conclusions from that figure, starting from the broad figure, sort of like take-home messages, if you will. Then we do that with the next figure, and we do that and we go down until we've told the full story of all of the figures. That is the backbone of our results and discussion. You can see here that you also can put in reference to the literature because we evaluate it. We also have to put implications, and we also need to sort of like just talk about the basic findings and discuss outcomes. So all of this is very, very important for your results and discussion, and that is the meat of your paper. Yum, 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 yum. That's the tasty bit that people really want to know. So spend a lot of time making sure that it's succinct, that it tells everything you want to tell, and that the story makes sense. Then you can move on to the next sections. Now this little middle bit, like, it's completely up to you which bit you do next, but I like to work with the methodology, which is this bit here, the number 2. I like to make sure that I can explain how I got all of the results that I've just talked about. In the methodology section, we need to talk about how you actually got those results. And in chemistry, my field, it was even down to the manufacturer at which you bought your chemicals. So you need to get very granular. What software did you use? What version of the software? What packages did you invoke in that software? All of those things are very important. You need to think about what someone would need to know to replicate your studies. And that is really the nuts and bolts and the most important aspect of the materials and methods. Could someone reproduce what you've done based on reading just the methods and the results? That is a sign of a good section. The next thing I really like to write is the introduction section. So I go up here and I write the introduction section. The introduction section is like an inverted pyramid where you talk about the broad implications of your work and you work down to the specifics of your work. There is a very sort of like standardized approach, and you can even sort of like put in introductions from your field into ChatGPT and ask it to give you a structure so that you know you're replicating the best papers in your field. That's what I like to do with AI tools, and I can do that for every single section of this sort of like paper writing journey. And so in here you can see we are establishing a territory, which is the large sort of like field you're working in, and then we establish a niche within that, and then occupying that niche, what are you actually sort of like finding? What are your actual sort of like implications for a very sort of like small part of that niche? And then in the last part of your introduction, you need to make sure that you're talking about the significance of your work, the implications, and the future studies you would like to do. It's a little bit of a teaser, a little bit of a foundation on which you can build the next section. So that's why I like to write it next, because it makes sense to me that I need to build up from the results and discussion, and then my introduction sort of teases and allows me to present my work without questions popping into people's minds like, why did they do it? Which field is this? All of those things should be answered in the introduction before they even get to the results and the discussion. So the next thing I really like to write is the conclusion section. So we go down here and the conclusions are just the massive take-home messages from your work. It's important that you talk about it in light of, you know, the most significant things they can find, and also here you may talk about future work and any limitations, but the conclusions are a very important part of the research paper because a lot of people may just read the first bit and the last bit to get an idea of what's in the middle and decide whether or not they want to devote time to reading the entire thing. So conclusions are very important, nice and succinct, and sometimes it's just a paragraph at the end of a paper that says this is the major finding, these are the things we found out, this is what we want to do next, and we think it's cool. And you can see in one of my papers just down here, it's number 4 and it's planar nanocomposite electrodes, blah blah blah, and then we've got down here therefore demonstrating the potential of these electrode function, blah. And so this is the massive last sentence is the take-home messages. By reading all of this, we've demonstrated what we actually promised you in the introduction, which was that we can actually do what we've said. There was all the evidence. Great. One of the last sections people should write is the abstract, and so that's up here. Number 5 is the abstract. The abstract has got a very, very specific structure. Go check out my other video where I talk about how to write an abstract easily using a simple formula. In the abstract, you'll want to cover very important things like the problem statement, like the indication of how you actually did it, the methodology, the main findings, and the principal conclusions that someone should take home from your paper. These are very, very important things that will allow someone to decide whether or not they want to read the paper in more detail. In fact, in academic circles, some people don't even read much further than the abstract before citing it. That's how important it is. And the last section that you should think about is the references. Now, by that, I don't mean that you leave that to the end. You actually reference as you go through and write out your paper, but you need to go and just double check your references. In fact, during my thesis examination, one of the examiners said, I noticed that some of the references don't have a middle initial. I was like, oh my God. You actually went through my references and you looked at middle initials. I cannot believe it. And it's just about that final touch to make sure your references reference everything that you've mentioned in your paper, that you provide supporting evidence with those references, that the references are actually sort of like saying what you want them to say. There's so many times I've reviewed a peer-reviewed paper, I've looked at their references, and the reference doesn't even sort of like support what they're using the reference for, if that makes sense. So ultimately, you need to just go through and do that final check on your references. It's a place where a lot of academics leave that kind of like, they just go, okay, yeah, the referencing software's done that. That's good. I can just forget about it. But it's not as easy as that. Go through your references. Just make sure that what you're using them for actually makes sense. And then you'll be sort of like well ahead of a lot of people that submit to academic journals. I can assure you that. So there we are. That's how you write an academic paper step by step. Let me know in the comments what you would add. And also, if you like this video, go check out this one where I talk about writing an abstract using simple formulas. I think you'll love it.